First, did God create evil? Because essentially if God created everything and there is evil in this world, it seems logical to conclude that God created evil also. But I think we would have to answer, what is evil? Because I think the logic of what evil is kind of responds to that and tells us that no, God did not create evil, depending on what you mean by create. I'll get to that later. But to me, the definition of evil is pretty simple. Evil is the destruction of good things. You've probably heard Christian philosophers and Christian apologists say that evil is the absence of good, just as darkness is the absence of light, or cold is the absence of heat. There's no new substance called cold. It is just kind of the absence of heat. And I think mostly that's a functional definition that I would be okay to agree to. But I think that it's not completely active enough and it needs clarification. I think that evil is an active destruction of good things. Let's say that someone kills another person, then what is the person that's killing lacking? Because I feel like that's a very active action. But I would say that it is the destruction of the good, because it destroys someone else's life, of course. The foundation of Christian ethics is essentially Jesus saying that you should love God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That essentially sums up the 10 Commandments, which sums up the entirety of Christian ethics. If we look into the 10 Commandments themselves, they are essentially going to be prohibitions against destroying the two things that Jesus said are the essential commandments. If you kill your neighbor, you obviously don't love them. If you steal from your neighbor, you don't love them. But also, if we get a little more detailed, it's because the various things about loving your neighbor and loving God are blessings from God. So, evil is the destruction of these blessings. Thou shalt not murder, because you would kill someone and take away their life, and life is good. Thou shalt not steal, because God has given something to someone else to enjoy, and you should not take that away from them. And I know there's gray areas when it comes to stealing, but that's a product of an already broken world. If the world was not already broken, then any instance of stealing would be indisputably wrong. It would be a factor in the breaking of the world. And as for whether that proves you don't love someone when you steal from them, can you really love someone if you aren't happy for their blessings, if you would take that away from them? Don't cheat on your spouse because, well, of course, you should not destroy the good relationship that God has given to you and your spouse. And I think that naturally comes to the conclusion that evil does not really exist by itself. There's no new thing that's created by evil. There is no murder if life does not exist. And there's no stealing if your neighbor doesn't have anything. There's no cheating on your spouse if you don't have a spouse in the first place. I'm sorry to all the single people out there, which includes myself, but that's irrelevant. And so if evil does not exist by itself and essentially just leeches onto the good, God did not create any evil because he created good things to exist. But of course we could say God created creatures that are capable of committing evil, and so that is responsible for all the evil in the world. So isn't that God's fault? And why is it possible to commit evil acts? And so my response to that is I think that it's always kind of a possibility. I guess it's arguable whether we could live in a world where it's not possible to conceive of doing evil. I'm not too sure about that, but I would expect it's possible to conceive of doing evil just by default. And especially if evil is the destruction of good things, it's hard to imagine a world where when good things are made, it's not really possible at all to conceive of unmaking them. A simple bit of reasoning here is also to contrast creation and the act of bringing good things into existence with a lack of it prior to creation. For every good thing that began to exist or does exist, it's always possible to imagine its state of nothingness, that it does not exist. Because if the good thing began to exist, there was naturally a point when it did not exist. In the real world, then, it's always possible to imagine depriving someone of a good thing. An example of this is stealing. Let's say that you have something that you really like, but your neighbor has a different thing that you also think is cool, and you would think, oh, I kind of like that. I want to steal it. I want to take it from them and have it for myself. Now, if you actually do that, then you would already be committing evil. But you could imagine a possible world where instead of needing to take something from your neighbor, whenever you want something, God just gives it to you. But I think that this allows room for an argument regarding contentment. And remember the logic of evil that we use for this video. I don't know if you agree, but I feel like it's pretty uncontroversial. Evil is the destruction of good things. And let's say that you live in this world where instead of needing to take from someone else, whenever you want something, God just gives it to you. And I would say that if you are kind of just in this mindset where nothing is ever enough for you, you want to keep just devouring more and more, then that kind of defeats the purpose of good things because you're not really enjoying them anymore. They're just kind of things that you take and then you just do away with. And then you move on to the next thing. You're never really content. You're never really happy. And that kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? For example, it would be kind of absurd to have someone just get a car, then they see a new one that they want, take that one, then see a new one that they like more, and then take that one, and just ditch the old car, build a collection of like 1,000 cars or something. Or to say that a man has one woman they love, then ask God to just spawn another one for them, and so on. In the second example of the man and woman, it's obviously also cheating on your spouse. You have to ask what you mean when you're asking for another woman to love. Are you really loving them if you're just asking for a new one? That's not to say that we should never move on to new things, but it is saying that we should enjoy them while we have them and not just abandon them and ask for something new and not enjoy what we had before. And I think you could already see at some point that you're not really enjoying the blessings that God has given you. But in that, I think there's also the next point. Desiring evil isn't really just desiring evil just for the sake of desiring something evil. You're desiring something that is actually desirable because it's meant to be enjoyed by you. There's always some kind of good thing that you want at the end of an evil action. Just usually in a way that deprives other people of good things or destroys the purpose of even the blessings you yourself have received. If this clip gave you something to think about, please check out the full video which is linked in the description below. More clips will be taken from these videos and I'll be covering more similar topics on my channel, so subscribe for more.